Hey guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Crooked Illness. As you guys can see from today's title, we are going to be talking about reporting on mental health, what that is and what it means. Here to have this conversation with me is Michael Simonson. Michael is someone I have been lucky to connect with through a friend of mine. He is a mental health journalist and a freelance public relations representative. Michael is joining me today to get into what his role as a reporter comprises of, what it has been like so far, and what prompted him to get into this type of work. So without further ado, welcome Michael to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I just put some peanuts in my mouth because I hadn't eaten for a while, so excuse the chewing.
You're fine. You're totally fine. But thank you, Michael, for being here today. Excited to get into this conversation with you. Yes.
Thanks for having me, Paris. It means a lot. I've never been on a podcast before. I've been on for my marketing stuff a few years ago. I was on a couple, but they never aired. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this one is, so we're gonna make this happen, and it is
Wow.
get out there. So first time for everything. So let's just dive right into it. So I know when we first connected, you told me that your main job is currently in doing PR outreach. So how did you transition from that to having an interest for reporting on mental health related topics?
I had a personal experience in a couple hospitals when I was 20, about 15 years ago. And 2 years ago, I had never written about it. I was like you said, I was in marketing. And I 2 years ago, I had a PR client who wrote a book about bipolar disorder. And as I was researching bipolar disorder for my PR outreach to write a better pitch to the journalists, I stumbled on a website called Mad in America, madinamerica.com. And it's a community of people who've had, a lot of the people in the community have had negative experiences in psychiatric facilities, just like me. And it was the first time I had heard about that or read about other people having bad experiences. Believe it or not, in 15 years, I hadn't heard about anyone else having a bad experience that I can remember. Maybe like a couple movies, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but that was it. So I thought, wow, this sort of validates my experience, or at least confirms some of my suspicions that there's something wrong with the larger mental, psychiatric or mental health field in America. And so I decided over the course of the next few months, I'm going to write about my experience to share with other people. Maybe it's not happening anymore. I don't know, but it's clearly happened before. Based on all these accounts I've read. These people do not sound like they're lying. So I felt like I could write about my experience to at least make them feel better and help them feel validated, and maybe have a larger impact where people who, like me, didn't know that there were people out there like us, and they'll see my story and say, wow, I want to speak up because I was mistreated.
Yeah. So, so when you mentioned that the moment when you found Mad in America, so when you found Mad in America, is that the moment when you decided to get involved with mental health reporting? Or if it's not, what was that defining moment for you when you were like, this is what I want to do. I want to work, because I know you said you mainly worked in PR and you kind of are doing the mental health reporting as well. So if you could, what was that moment when it just kind of hit you, where you were like, this is what I want to do. I want to talk about my experience and,
Well, it was, so I found Mad in America. Actually, and I wasn't sure I was going to write at that moment. And it took a month or two where I was doing marketing for them and PR for Mad in America for free, because I knew that it was an important mission that they had. So I had, there was an article they wanted me to, they said, one of the people at the website said, here's this article. It was by the founder of the website, Robert Whitaker. And the article was about suicides and antidepressants, and the link between suicide and antidepressants, just to judging whether the antidepressants really had the positive impact on preventing suicide that pharmaceutical companies and psychiatry had said they had. And it was a really long article, and it took me 7 hours to read, even though it was should have only taken me 1 hour. And it was just talked about pharmaceutical corruption covering up suicides in trials for Zoloft, Prozac. Pharmaceutical companies stacking the boards of nonprofit charities raising awareness about suicide. They would be filled with executives from pharmaceutical companies to help promote, raise awareness, not just of suicide, but of drugs treating suicide. And then it looked at studies showing that suicide rates had actually gone up in the last 10, 20 years, at the same time as antidepressant prescriptions have gone up. And it looked really closely at the numbers, and it really made a good case that antidepressants haven't had the impact, a positive impact. Maybe they've had no impact, but, you know, maybe they haven't had a negative impact, but, you know, they looked at a Veterans Affairs study of veterans, war vets, who were more likely to commit suicide after getting psychiatric treatment compared to veterans who didn't get psychiatric treatment, even when they both had psychiatric issues. And then at the last bottom of the article, there was a little sentence or a paragraph about how, you know, we need to also respect people who've had bad experiences in hospitals, who've been forced in, and you know, maybe there's a better way to preserve people's autonomy, their respect, self-respect, and dignity than forcing them into treatment, a conventional treatment at least. And that hit me like really hard. And I thought, the whole article did, especially that line, I thought, oh, now this is a really big story. You know, the pharmaceutical corruption really bothered me. The possibility that was widespread. And I'd had horrible experiences with the drugs they put me on. There was like an obsession among the doctors to give me these drugs. And it just sort of confirmed some suspicions of mine. I thought, I got to share my story now. It was that article, Suicide in the Age of Prozac. That's the name of the article.
Wow. Yeah. So, you know, what has your experience been like so far in your role as working as a mental health reporter? Like, tell me a little bit about that, because I really want to hear about.
Sure.
Yeah.
My experience as a mental health reporter. So it's been really interesting, like really exciting, to be honest. I really enjoyed it. I did like a lot of different stories, like 7 stories. I'm hoping to get like a conversation Q&A type article published, which would be my 7th story, I think. Immediately when I decided to start writing and reporting, I didn't want this to be some type of vendetta against what happened to me in the hospital, against the people who did that to me, what I felt did wrong to me. I wanted it to be something like legitimate and something truthful. And I thought, oh, well, I want to be a journalist. I don't necessarily want to be an advocate. I don't want to be an advocate. I want to be a journalist. Like I wanted to find the truth. And so I just decided to learn journalism. So I read 5 to 10 books about journalism, like college textbooks and biographies by journalists. And I went to journalism networking groups. I interviewed journalists. And then I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and I interviewed and interviewed and interviewed. And I looked up tips for how to conduct interviews the proper way, how to avoid being biased. And so I read the biography of Seymour Hersh, who's the journalist who uncovered the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, and a book about a New Yorker reporter about how to interview people, a couple of books about how to do investigative journalism. I interviewed a Pulitzer Prize winner, and I got to know a New York Times reporter. And I would watch movies like All the President's Men and Spotlight about journalism. And I just wrote. So like I had one big story last year. It took me 3 months to write. I co-wrote it with Robert Whitaker, who is a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. He was the founder of Man America. And my approach was that this is going to be journalism school for me. I'm going to just throw myself into this responsibly. And so I interviewed for that story. I interviewed somewhere around 65 people. You know, one of the interviews was like 5 hours long, 3 to 5 hours long, with the mom of one of the people, the person involved in the story. And I got a lot of documents sent to me by her, and I got like the open records request done for me. The local town where the main person in the story was from, they sent me open, I got the salary of the doctor who was involved. And I usually did everything from my apartment. I didn't go around much. I thought about flying out to where the story occurred in Wisconsin, but I didn't. But sometimes I would go around and meet people for coffee. but it was a lot of interviewing. It was a lot of talking to people, and a lot of writing, a lot of research, interviews with people who were on the other side of the story, who weren't happy to talk to me. Some of the interviews got really awkward and intense. I got emotional. I had, so that article was like just it was a very exciting experience.
Which article was that?
That was called, it was a 2-part article. The first part was called The Case Against AOT, Kendra's Law 20 Years Later. And then the second part of that article was called Andrew Rich. I didn't know this kind of stuff could happen, or something like that. The article names were a little bit interesting, clunky.
What does the AOT part stand for?
Assisted outpatient treatment.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so the first, I know you also mentioned to me before, you did this story that I thought was really cool. And this is kind of how I learned about you, through my friend who, told me about this project that you're working on. And I'd love to hear you talk about that piece that you've been working on, where you interviewed, around 85 homeless individuals to learn about their life experiences and possible relationship to mental illness. So what has been the biggest thing that you found from working on that project?
Yeah, talking to the homeless people. Yeah, so that started about 3 months ago, and I'll go back to like how I got into that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had heard, since I started working on all this 2 years ago, something that people, basically I'm writing about my own negative experience and the mistreatment, other people who found that they've been mistreated, believe they've been mistreated in psychiatric facilities. And the counter, when you bring this up, and if you want to file a lawsuit, or if you want to write a blog about it, or say that the treatment in hospitals is wrong, and you argue there needs to be better protection, civil rights protections for people in psychiatric hospitals, there's a counter argument some people make, especially the most intense critics, advocates for like forced treatment and making sure people get treated even against their will in hospitals. They say that homeless people, without proper treatment, people become homeless because of their mental illness. And they do say that a lot of people on the streets, a large percentage, significant percentage, have mental illness. That's why they're there, because it's untreated. So I wanted to really learn that better, see if it's true, how true it is that people who are homeless because they're not getting treatment inside psychiatric facilities. And so I decided I was going to interview them. I just started interviewing them. I first started giving them money, like a couple bucks. I just thought, there's no way they're going to talk to me unless I give them money. And then I sort of, as a journalist, you're not really supposed to pay people for interviews. So I started to figure out ways to not pay them, or wait till after the interview. Obviously, because you do want to give them money. You want to help them. They're in desperate situations. So that was a challenge. But anyway, I've interviewed about 85 people in Midtown Manhattan and Los Angeles. And, there's certainly people I can interview or refuse to interview, or while I'm interviewing them, it's clear they're just something close to psychotic, or very seriously mentally impaired. I would say that's the word, not psychotic, but very mentally impaired. I mean, there's a man walking down the streets of Hollywood Boulevard with no pants, so that's a guy who, I didn't even bother obviously going up to him. It would have been risky. So there's another woman who was violently screaming, I would say, and then there's people who I have tried, where I'll say, can I talk to you? And they'll be talking to someone else that's not there while I'm talking to them. I would say it's a minority of people, but there's certainly that's a segment who are clearly mentally impaired. But I don't know what their backstory is, because they don't talk to me. So I can't say for sure what the issue is. The majority of people are not like that. And I talked to, and of those that agree to talk to me, something like 80-90% seemed, I don't know, maybe 70% seemed fine. And so I talked to them, and what I learned is that almost 100% of them had stories to tell, detailed stories that sounded real and honest and truthful about traumatic childhoods. Sometimes traumatic, you know, teenage years or 20 or in their adulthoods, but usually it was traumatic, severely traumatic, I would say, childhoods. And then like a large segment of them, you know, 30 to 50% also had diagnosis of mental illness. And a lot of those were serious mental illness, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So it didn't seem like the serious mental illness or the mental illness was the cause of their homelessness. That's not what I walked away thinking. I walked away thinking the cause of their homelessness was growing up in extremely difficult, adverse environments and not having support from other people, not having a community, not having loved, not having a good family, a close-knit family. That's what I walked away thinking. And I thought that the mental illness was like almost unrelated. You know, there were a couple times where I wouldn't say unrelated, but it seemed like an ancillary consequence, like not the primary consequence or not the primary cause of the homelessness. There's two women who were related to each other. Both of them had very traumatic childhoods. One was raped repeatedly by family members or as children, and around age 12, this all happened. And then at age 12, both of them got diagnosed with schizophrenia. And they couldn't clearly describe to me the symptoms that they were experiencing from schizophrenia. Meanwhile, they're totally coherent, charming. Their stories were really layered, you know, made sense. And like, you know, the idea that getting them into a psychiatric hospital is the difference between, you know, homelessness or not seems ridiculous, especially considering the treatment that occurs in psych hospitals. It's, you know, it's even historically, it was not very high quality treatment, custodial, and so I walked away thinking, you know, I had another experience that's interesting. It was a guy on the street screaming, and I walked up to him and I said, why are you doing this? You know, it appears, you know, you do seem like something might be wrong here. And I said, why are you screaming? And he said, I'm ventilating. And he meant I'm venting, you know. And he told me, and we stopped, and I was with a couple of my friends, and he said, you know, I'm just, you know, I asked if he was homeless. He said he wasn't. And I asked him for his like life story. I asked him if he had a mental illness diagnosis. He said, yeah, he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 12 and put on Haldol, as antipsychotic. And I said, why? And he said, I was running down the street screaming. And he said he was running down the street screaming because he had just been raped by his mom's boyfriend. And I said, is that true? Were you acting crazy, or were you telling the truth? And he said, no, I wasn't. It wasn't crazy. I wasn't crazy. It was true. He looked me straight in the eye. He was totally coherent. It was a completely like normal conversation. He wasn't out of his mind. He was screaming. I'm sure maybe he did have mental health issues, but the connection between, you know, the cause of his struggles I would have said maybe it was the abuse as a child. And, you know, like you could see how maybe he wasn't really schizophrenic because he was screaming and it was really poignant because, you know, I was sure something was wrong with him, screaming to no one in the middle of the street, screaming at the cars. I was sure this guy, I had a bunch of times where that happened, where I was sure this person was really mentally unwell. And then I would talk to them and they would be totally lucid and have a really good explanation for the circumstances. In those situations, you know, it makes me think, well, maybe we're overstating this issue of how much mental illness causes homelessness.
Was that surprising when you learned that, when you found that out? Because I know you said initially when you went in to do the interviews, you were trying to look for the link between homelessness and mental illness, but then you found the majority of the people that you spoke to and had conversations with talk more about trauma than the mental illness. Was that surprising? Like, was that a surprising finding that you found from working on this?
Not entirely. I am skeptical of this explanation of mental illness causing homelessness. I've seen some data that shows that it's overstated, but it wasn't shocking, but it was surprising, the extent. You know, like I said, I was in Hollywood Boulevard 2 weeks ago, and there was a man holding a sign that he said he could give penis massages, and I walked by him, and he gave me a look in the eye, like a weird look, like an awkward. He smiled, and I was thinking that man is probably, something's not right there. And I kept walking, got food, came back, and I passed him again. And then I thought, I got to just try to talk to him. I went back and it was completely normal conversation. Guy
Wow.
had two signs, sign had messages on both sides. This message on the other side was a little more detailed, and he can, it wasn't just about, it was less graphic, and people were coming up to him, giving him money, taking pictures with him for the sign. The sign was working for him. It was getting him money. And a really beautiful woman walked by, and she said hi to him and was talking to him. He knew her. He was talking to me about his life story. It was, again, another story of really pretty terrible abuse. And he'd been neglected. He never got the attention he wanted. That's why he was on the street doing this. He said he would sell water on the street, but he knew the city would shut him down. And it was, I was really surprised. Like,
Wow.
This guy had a completely normal, a completely coherent, logical story for why he was acting the way he was. He wasn't severely mentally ill. Or you could say he was. He had a diagnosis. He'd been diagnosed as bipolar. He'd gotten locked up in a hospital when he was a kid. So you could say he was severely mentally ill. But the idea that that was the cause of his circumstances, that he needs medicine and treatment in a psych hospital, and that would fix his life problems, is ridiculous. I mean, it's pretty patently bizarre to, you're ignoring the awful circumstances he had as a child. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could go into a psych hospital and that would cure the trauma we experienced? But I think that's, I could be wrong. Maybe psych hospitals do offer that. Maybe we need to lock people up or figure out a way to get more people in psych hospitals. That'll fix it. It could be, but I doubt it. I doubt that was that man's issue.
So when you bring up mental hospitals, I would love to hear you, because I know when we talked, you talked to me about the work that you've done studying various mental hospitals and the practices conducted there. So what inspired you to write about that?
Well, that was, I mean, sort of like I said, I had an experience 15 years ago. So obviously I already explained like the Finding Man in America. So yeah, I guess the original inspiration was my own experience 15 years ago. And that was, I was in college, I was in a fraternity, and so I'm working on a book about this. So there's a lot of sensitive details that I don't want to go into every detail, but I also don't want to hide it either, or cover it up. So basically I was committed to 2 psychiatric hospitals 15 years ago. It made the first hospitalization made a little bit of sense. I was manic and I did have racing thoughts. Though, I can't say the thoughts were that bizarre, or that, that my behavior was that bizarre, but, certainly I was manic. My parents were worried. My sister was worried. My friends were worried. And so that ended up me being a week in the hospital. I got out. I remember thinking, like, I went out with friends after that over the next 9 days. And I don't remember thinking like, this is something that I need to write about or anything. It was just like, I was in a fraternity with guys who, like, one of my friends jumped out of an apartment building on the 3rd floor and punctured his lung. I had a friend who fell asleep in a tree high up, and we always had just absurd stories happening in our fraternity. Everyone was doing the dumbest things. So 1 week in a psych hospital I actually sort of thought it was like a badge of honor. And then I ended up in another one, and that made no sense. I mean, it had a small thread of logic to it, but it really was bizarre. And I had to go to great lengths to uncover exactly how it happened recently with, getting a lawyer involved to get my records. And that's, details I don't want to go over right now because they're sensitive, but it was so weird. Maybe it was, I would say, traumatic, but more than that, it just didn't make sense. And that's sort of what I was thinking. This is a story needs to be written about. But again, it took me 15 years because there was no one to talk to about it. I couldn't bring it up because when you say I was locked up wrongly in a hospital, it doesn't work as like a way to start a conversation. Like people just,
because of the stigma
because of the stigma. I don't even know. The stigma is something deeper than stigma. It's when you say that, a doctor found you to be clinically insane and you say, no, the doctor's wrong. It's like, people have, there's studies, so I've looked into this too. So there's some studies that have shown, and there's a whole body of research showing that, once you're labeled as unwell, people just don't really believe what you're saying. Obviously you can be called crazy, it's fine, but if you have that patina of a medical doctor saying you're unwell, it's something different. It's like impossible to cut through that, and get people to believe you. So like there was a study in the 60s that they interviewed a group of people. They played a recording of a guy who sounded really normal describing his life. And they said, is he psychotic and neurotic, or is he totally normal? And everyone said he's totally normal, or 90% of the people. And then they played the recording again, but they told everyone that the man had just been diagnosed as psychotic by a doctor. And suddenly everyone said, oh, this guy's psychotic. Or like a lot of them said they were psychotic, that he was psychotic. And the guy was the same guy that everyone said was normal before he was labeled psychotic. And, there's people who've done research and say like, I just was reading a book yesterday, and they've done studies. When you label someone as being mentally ill because of genetic causes, you're much more likely to think to stay away from him and think he's dangerous, even when when the behavior has been read back as completely normal. But if they say, oh, this is a genetic mentally ill person, then you're just going to stay away. So, I guess that's why I for 15 years, there was no one to talk. I told like 5 people about what happened.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned, that you're still in the process of working on the book, and you're still working on that, writing it. So, what is the primary connection between your story that you're telling in your book, and kind of the work that you're doing now, So
the connection is, I would describe, so as I said, I was mistreated I believe I was mistreated really quite badly in the hospital. And I'm writing now about people who believe that they were mistreated in hospitals. So yeah, I can I can give you like more examples of what I found now. So I guess something that's interesting is trying my most recent work. There was well, I start from the beginning. The first thing I did after I was inspired to start writing last year, 2 years ago, was I did a survey of people who said that they were in psychiatric hospitals. I surveyed people from the Mad in America community, from Facebook, and from Reddit. And we found that it was something like 70% said they had bad experiences. Actually, 66% said they had a traumatic experience from the hospital. 32% said the hospital saved their life. So a large percentage said it was life-saving. I do think those are the people who are voluntarily in there. But I have to check that data. I'm not 100% sure how much of the overlap is, but clearly there was a larger percentage that had traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
And they left comments too. So it wasn't just like yes or no, I had a traumatic experience. Yes, they checked yes. They actually wrote comments. 250 people wrote comments. Like a large percentage, and the comments were heartbreaking. And I left them on there, and it was just like, people saying that like they're so angry, they're furious about what was done. They pondered suicide after. A few people said they pondered suicide. Someone said they'd rather die than go back. Someone said, my God, what the things that go on there. And I called like 20, 30 of these people to hear their stories, and they were totally sounded fine. They sounded coherent, and it was believable. Like they believe they were horribly abused, and this has been corroborated by other reports and studies on this subject by psychiatrists. So that was like the first, evidence that I collected that this is more widespread than I think is reported. And I got to know people through that. There was one man who would email me regularly. Can't believe I forgot his name, but he would email me regularly, and Zell, his name was Zell. And he would email me regularly saying, I've been mistreated in psych hospitals for his whole life. He was in his 60s, and he was really sad about it, heartbroken, and he wanted to try to change things, but he was also very picky about what he would work on. He was a little bit demanding and would email me a lot. And it was a little bit much, but I felt really bad for him. I believed him in the stories he told about the
Yeah.
abuse, and he would email me, and then he started talking about taking his own life, and he eventually did. And
Wow.
and my boss wrote a story about it. Robert Whitaker wrote a story about it, and he mentioned me briefly in the story, and it's just about how Zell had, talked repeatedly about the mistreatment that he experienced, and no one really took him seriously. And the pain it had caused, the pain the medication caused, I think there were permanent side effects it left him with. And he felt no way out
Wow.
other than to take his own life. And that was one of those examples of a story that was like very, very sad. And I think shows, it was just one story. I mean, but it was a
Yeah.
really heartbreaking
Wow.
story.
Wow. Well, I think the work that you're doing with, going into these hospitals and doing that is very important, because I feel like, that's something that, I have in common with you as well. As I was hospitalized and I was inside a hospital, and the things that I saw, there were things that I witnessed there that, shouldn't be happening or shouldn't be going on. And I feel like it's important to, do work like that and bring awareness to this, because I feel like so many people don't really know what happens inside hospitals. They think, okay, because my thought and my perception before I went into a psychiatric hospital, I thought, okay, if I go to a place like this, I'm going to come out and be great. I'm going to be better. I'm going to feel better. I'm going to be, it's because that's what you kind of think going into a place like that you get treatment, you get some kind of, rehabilitation or something to make you feel better when you leave. You feel better coming out than you did going in. And my experience, I needed to be there. I really did. But coming out, I felt worse than I did going in. And I feel like that's important for you. And that's why I think I connected with you so deeply, is because of the work that you're doing with this reporting and writing your own story and kind of bringing light to that in light with the stuff that you're doing with the conversations you've had with other people related to mental health, mental illness, and all of that. Because I just don't think enough people really know what goes on. And not to not to really sit here and bash like all hospitals, like everything that happens is like bad and not good, but for the most part, to kind of really portray the experiences that you've had and that other people have had who have been inside of these facilities, and kind of to just tell their stories, right? Tell their stories, what happened and what went on, and just so other people have a better understanding, and kind of to continue to bring attention to this, to hopefully reform certain aspects of different things. And I feel like that's ultimately like the goal, right? Is you want to talk about these things so people can learn about it and understand it, because if people don't know or they don't understand it, no one's gonna really see the point of why are we gonna talk about this, or why are we gonna fix this. So I'm really happy that we connected, and that Richard like sent me your name, your information, and we got to talk, and I got to hear a little bit about the work that you're doing and the awesome stuff you're doing, going out and having these conversations and doing this, because it is important and it is necessary, and people do need to understand and learn about these things, because it affects people on all kinds of different levels. So I really want to just thank you for your time today, and being able to connect and being able to actually put this together and have this conversation with me and really share all the things that you did today. So
thanks a lot. It means a lot that you wanted like to talk to me.
Yeah, of course it did. Because when I heard about the work that you're doing with the reporting and kind of your story and writing your book, and kind of, because that's kind of very similar to what I'm doing. Because I know, I don't know if I mentioned, but I've been working on a book, and it's called Crooked Illness, which is the name of the podcast. And I'm not done with it. Like, kind of how you are, you're not done with yours. I'm still kind of, I have it, I'm working on it, but that's why I really connected, because I was like, wow, like he's, like, this is great. So I'm like, I want to talk to him, so yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Michael, for for making this happen. And I'm excited to put this out there and post this episode.
Great. Oh, thanks for having me again.
Yes, of course. All right. Bye.
Bye.